Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade.
We chronicled the distinct memories of our childhood in our book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s, which takes you on a notably historic journey through that often forgotten decade. We also want to hear about your experiences during the 1950s. We will feature guests whose special stories of that decade will bring to mind magical moments of reflection, some with tears, some with smiles, but above all, a good dose of laughter.
We would like you to chat with us as we bring to mind the sights and sounds so familiar to that time in history. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Greetings, everybody. This is number 85. I'm Janine.
And I'm Jackie. We're so glad you've joined us.
That's right. We have another great guest with us today. I tell you, Jackie, these guests that we have on just tell the most phenomenal stories about life in the 50s. And today will be no different. But before we get to our guests, let's do a little housekeeping, okay?
Okay, viewers, please note the logo in the upper right-hand corner of your book, of your screen. It is our book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s. You will also see at the bottom of the book on the right-hand side a little white spot. Well, that little white spot is a medallion that indicates that this book won in 2022 the National Independent Press Award in the regional nonfiction category as the distinguished favorite. Also, take a look at the bottom of your screen and you'll note the www.whilethewindmillwatch.com address. Please go there for more information about the book, about the authors, about the events, and about the vendors where you can purchase the book, and about the 1950s Fun Chat. As Janine mentioned, we've been doing this for quite a while here, and we have all of the recordings listed right there, so you could click on those and get a taste of memory lane in the 50s. So
this is number 85 today, Jackie.
Woohoo!
Yeah, one a week.
I guess. So I would like to introduce you to our guest, folks. The Reverend Robert L. Polk was born in 1928 in Chicago, the youngest of 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. Both parents were products of the Great Migration. That's when blacks who fled the South to go north to escape the Jim Crow, Jim Crow is the term which represented the legitimization of anti-black racism. His mother was from Georgia and his father from Texas. They met in a church group in Chicago, married and raised their family in Chicago's South Side. Born during the Great Depression, Jim and his family, along with friends and neighbors, were poor and all had to work very hard to survive. Bob is the grandson of an enslaved family. His father's people were slaves of Charles Polk, a cousin to President James K. Polk. So his 2 older brothers went off to serve their country in World War II. One served in Europe, the other in India. The war brought on new jobs and income, which afforded his younger sister and Bob to attend and graduate from college. Now, Bob graduated from Doane College in Crete, Nebraska, and Hartford Theological Seminary in Connecticut. So Bob and Flora were married in 1928 while at Riverside Church. 1 year into their marriage, they adopted a biracial child from Greece. They named him George. The marriage ended after 15 years, and George was plagued with issues that claimed his life in 1999. Reverend Polk is an ordained congregational / United Church of Christ minister and has held positions in North Dakota as a pastor and a YMCA Youth Director, in New York City at Riverside Church, at Dillard University in New Orleans as Dean of Chapel and Students, as well as other professional positions. Now, for the past 20 years, Reverend Polk has lived in a continuing care retirement community in Philadelphia, along with over 300 retirees. In retirement, he has served several interim pastorates, and in Newfield and in Washington, Connecticut. Bob, welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. We are so glad you are here with us.
Thank you, and thank you for that nice introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. That was well intended, though. However, okay, we're going to start out with what influences during the 1950s impacted your life.
Well, let me say that the 1950s were magic for me and were the defining decade that made my life and made me what I am today. Sometimes it's hard to realize, looking back, how important many of the issues were that helped you to define who you are. But we just finished World War II in 1946. At 4 short years, GIs had returned to college, to work, to start families, to buy homes. And we were trying to live and lead a new life as a nation. So I was a part of all that, as was my community. And the 50s really capsulized everything. In 1952, I graduated college. 1955, I graduated seminary. 1955, I was ordained as a clergyman. 1955, I went to Berthold, North Dakota, as the first pastor of the church that had not had a pastor for 17 years. On top of that, I was the only Black person in town, or one of the few in the whole state of North Dakota. So my whole life career had been changed, but during the 1950s.
Yeah, exceptionally. And what or how did you get to Berthold? Why? What was the draw at Berthold, North Dakota?
Well, there was no real draw for Berthold. I was without a job when I graduated seminary and was looking for a church. And the fact that I had been an interim pastor at Garrison, North Dakota, for the summer of 1953, the bishop, we would call him that today, asked me if I would come back and try to resuscitate a small, rural, almost primitive town to see if we could do something with the church. I took the bait and I went out, sight unseen, to this little town. No running water, no paved streets, no electricity in the streets, only about 3 televisions in the whole town of 400 people. And I just thought that was my calling, in spite of the fact that I was Black and they were all white.
All right.
Yes.
But you had Christ in common. So on you went.
Yes, thank you. Amen. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So when did you get this inkling that, I think I'm called to be a pastor? What influenced you to even go that direction?
What is that again?
I said, what influenced you to become a pastor?
It was a long process. It wasn't a come to Jesus moment overnight.
Yeah.
The work that I was able to be involved in with my church and with young people, my minister and his wife, my parents quietly looked in that direction, but would never tell me. And, as we say in the business, the desire to work with and help people. And finally, I think, as we would say in the spirituals, God laid his hands on me and said, "This is your calling. Go out and do likewise."
Uh-huh.
Yes. Well, I'm curious to know, you got to Berthold, North Dakota. What were your first thoughts?
I don't like to swear on television.
Okay. Then don't.
Well, my first thoughts were, I have a job to do.
Okay.
I've been called to do this. And though people looked at me rather oddly, especially those wonderful little towhead kids that were running around the Legion's Hall when I got there for a big sort of a smorgasbord dinner. And I soon put that behind me and knew that I had to be a pastor. So I preached on Sundays and did hospital calling during the week and went to church and community programs in the course of the week, went to the school next door, behind me, and It just had to be a pastor, and I forgot about my race most of the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
So was there a physical church that was there waiting for you, or
Yes,
or
there
was the
was.
church-
Mhm.
There was.
It's no
And so-
longer there, but there was a little church called the Berthold, the Congregational Church of Berthold. Mhm.
Okay. And had it been used for other things for 17 years, or was it?
Yes,
Stand-
there was the closest town to Berthold was Minot, the big city,
Mhm.
Yep.
and the pastor of the Congregational Church in Minot served that church on special occasions,
I see.
weddings, funerals, confirmation, things like that. So it hadn't been used for a full-time ministry in over 17 years.
Okay, but it hadn't been in ruins. It had been.
No, it was.
yeah.
It was
That's good.
great. And the little parsonage was right next door, and they put that together for me, and 4 rooms and a path. You know what a path is?
Yes.
To the outhouse.
So
Yeah.
I had a path, and then when I went out for the first morning at the path, there were 4 snakes the size of my arm in the outhouse. And I looked at them, and they looked at me, and I closed the door. I said, "You guys can have it. I am not that competitive."
So
So
then what did you do?
What did you do?
I went home and called my mama and said, "Mom, guess what?" She was not excited at all. She said, "Call Sears. Sears has everything." And I called Sears and got a little indoor, chemical gun that I put in my second bedroom closet, and that served me for the rest of the 2 years that I was there. God is good.
Did you ever open that outhouse door again?
Oh yeah, I'd use I had to empty the porta pan there. And it took. I'm going to confess something. It took me several years to realize the snake's presence was a joke by some of the jokesters of the town.
Oh my!
I never saw a snake after the first day. Right?
Oh.
That was okay.
Didn't want to be there either.
Because it made me make that other decision to go to Sears.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to go out 3 times a day.
Well, that's just as well.
Never saw another snake.
Oh my goodness.
Bob, when you came to Berthold, and did the people of the church realize what your skin color was?
Oh yes, they knew.
Okay, and were there barriers that were put up because of that?
I've asked that question over the years to the people from my church who were closest to me, and they would always say that was never an issue.
Good deal.
However, in town, it was an issue. Some of the ne'er-do-wells or fathers, mostly fathers, said they didn't want this, capital N being in charge of the church and with their children. Those are the men who didn't even come to church. But so I felt the presence of that attitude as I walked around town my first, month or 2 before I got a car. Didn't have a car at first. And then I just had to let it go, like everything else that you want to escape from. And it's nothing you have any control over. So I just had to move on and let it go.
Yes, yes.
And the minister of the Lutheran church and I live right next to each other. That parsonage and my parsonage were next to each other. Got to know he and his family. I'd have about 25 to 30 people in church every Sunday. Easter and Christmas, it was larger, 50 to 100 maybe. And so the impact was okay.
Good. And then you went on from there to Minot. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it wasn't as easy as that.
Okay.
Black folks just don't have the opportunities and the options as if I were white. I went to Minot. First of all, I got to know Minot because it had a YMCA, a steam bath, a swimming pool, and a shower. So I could go to Minot to visit my parishioners in the hospital, stop by the Y, have lunch, and clean up.
Yeah.
More than once a week. So I knew that number one. Number two, the United States Air Force was building a major Air Force base in Minot.
Yes.
And so going to Minot was due to my pastor friend in Minot and the YMCA director. They knew sociologically and theologically that something had to be done to bridge the gap in Minot between peoples of color. because though there were no blacks in Minot, professional people or families, the Air Force was to bring in 17,000 people to a town that was only 35,000 people in population. And so they thought they didn't want to get rid of me. I should stay there and help to build that bridge between the incoming airmen of color and their families and the people of Minot who were trying to get to understand, like in Berthold, and understand black people. They didn't know black people.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I got to Minot. So I took the job as youth director of the YMCA in Minot.
Okay.
I was going to say, and then they learned that it doesn't matter what the package looks like on the outside, you're still people.
Yes.
We're all, and they learned that. Thanks to you.
Yeah.
Yes. But had you told us before that there had only been 48 people of color in the state before you arrived?
That's what I was told. I was the 48th black resident of the state of North Dakota.
Oh, okay.
And
As if it mattered.
Pardon?
As if that mattered.
Well, it did. I never saw another black person most of the time.
Yeah.
And then the brothers and sisters that lean on, except in the radar base south of town, there were some black people there, a couple of couples, and they sort of took me under their wing, and we would get together periodically for soul food and laughing and talking and things like that.
Yeah.
Yes. Where did the most of the people of color who came to Minot, were they from the deep south, or where from the rest of the country did they come?
Well, you need to know, first of all, that Minot had a very sordid reputation for having the largest red light district in the state of North Dakota. Women of the night, 4 or 5 establishments that kept that area of prostitution going long before I got there, and to some extent longer since I left 40, 60 years ago. So there were some black women in Minot, and the ladies of the night that worked in those houses, I'd say 60 to 70% of them were black women.
And they brought in by a certain
Yes. I would say there was a circuit that would bring them in. They would come in on their own, obviously, but maybe Chicago to Minneapolis to Minot, then move on to probably out to Seattle. Some came from New Orleans. There was a great study done by the Junior Chamber of Commerce, which tells the story of what was called High 3rd Street, which was where they resided and where the operation was. And the sheriff tried to close it down numbers of times, but the power of keeping it there was too strong to close it down. And of course, as I used to say to groups that I would speak to, they would say, well, if it wasn't for 3rd Street, we would feel better about black people. I said, well, if it wasn't for your husbands and your sons and your nephews, et cetera, 3rd Street couldn't exist because I'm the only other black man in town.
Yes.
So that was a shock to people. There was a real way of denial that they were involved in their own way.
Bob, did you ever feel as a pastor that you were called to go in and witness to the prostitutes?
No, never.
Okay.
But I will tell you this, on one very existential occasion, one of the prostitutes witnessed for me when one of her main, leader of the city, one of the leaders of the city, white, he tried to stop blacks from being served in his establishment. And this black prostitute called him out for it. And she'd never met me and I'd never met her. But I call that a sermon from unexpected pulpits.
Yes.
I would see them from time to time on 3rd Street, on Main Street, shopping, buying dresses and clothing and all, but we never got to know each other. Some of the men that ran the institutions had families, and they would send their children to Canada to school. They would come back for the summer. They would enroll their children in the YMCA, 4 or 5 or 6 of them, and they'd come in for swimming and got along well, but they didn't fellowship very easily, but they were in and out of the town every summer.
Uh-huh.
Interesting
And
dynamic. Go ahead.
yes, yes. When I think we had spoken previously that I had asked when some of the black people chose to leave North Dakota, and I had asked you, did they do that because there wasn't work, or they just wanted to leave, or was because of the weather, or what would have caused
Mhm.
of them to leave?
After that's a good intro to my book. I wrote a book about my years in North Dakota called "Fly in the Buttermilk." Fly in the Buttermilk.
Fly
Mhm.
in the buttermilk, folks.
One black
I
man's
do.
odyssey out on the prairie.
Yeah.
And the end of the book, I talked about the other black people who were my antecedents or predecessors to North Dakota before it became a state. 1890, it became a state. So they were black. They were always blacks in and around the prairies there. You know, the cavalry had black
Sure.
soldiers, and the
Sure.
Indians named those black soldiers buffalo soldiers
Yes.
because they felt their hair, and our hair felt like the buffalo hair mane. And so they called them
Ah,
Buffalo Soldiers, the cavalry black men.
Mhm.
Um,
yeah.
the other black settlements throughout the state, um, I have a book called Blacks in North Dakota, which I drew upon heavily as a part of that part of my book. But, you know, sometimes they got into trouble. Sometimes there were fights. Sometimes there were not families and too many single men there. And, you know, what would happen in a situation like that. But the summation was that many just moved on. They came because they were not slaves there. They were
Sure.
not enslaved. It was freedom. But then when they had to face the weather, they didn't have money to buy. They didn't get the same kind of treatment for receiving money to buy farmland as the white Scandinavians did. And they didn't stay very long. They took their skills there. They didn't last long, maybe 5, 6 years in various settlements throughout the Dakota Territory. Hmm.
Did any of them come in as homesteaders?
Yes, they did. Hmm.
Okay, and then still they broke the ground, and then and some stayed and some left. Would that
Some
be
stayed and some
accurate?
left. Yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Okay, and
And I tell them,
you are a good friend of a gentleman who we have
oh gosh,
also had on the Fun Shed, the Honorable Judge Bob Weefald,
yes,
and
indeed.
he suggested that we get in touch with you and have you as our guest, and viewers. That's often how we do get our guests. Is
Well,
you
that's why
let
I'm
us
here.
know?
Mhm.
Yes,
And we
and we
thank you.
yes,
Judge
we're
Bob
so.
Weefall.
I'm sorry.
I said, Judge Bob Weefall. He was 17 or 16 when I first met him. One of
Okay,
my
tell us about that.
one of my no, my work at the YMCA was youth director. And I had over 300 young people from junior and senior high schools in town, and we had a number of clubs, high Y clubs. The girls had tri Y clubs, junior high school, junior high Y clubs, and you know they were service clubs, helping youngsters to better themselves, a place to hang out when they left school and before they went home, or they come back at night and have meetings, weekend retreats. You know, the 1950s, we had sock hops. Remember those? Sock hops and dances and exchange students and all. And Bob happened to have been one of those students in the IY program. And he was the leader even then in 19, when he was about 17 years old. And he continued to be a great leader through the years. And we've remained in touch for almost 65 years. Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about rock and roll. Were you a rock and roll dancer?
No, no, I was sort of a jitterbug dancer. That's
Oh,
the leftovers from the 40s, you know.
yeah.
Sock hops were kind of happy, were big in those days, and the kids made up their own dances. We had a canteen in the lower level of the Y, and we'd have dances most weekends. And you
Mhm.
know, they would rock and roll wasn't quite in at that point. They came a little later than my time there. Maybe the
Mhm.
mid 50s, I mean, late 50s or something like that. I'm not sure. But we knew about Peggy Lee. She was a North Dakota girl.
Sure.
Right. From Valley City.
She
Mhm.
Dodge City, that's right.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
Fever was her big number.
Yes.
Fever,
Yeah.
fever in the morning and night.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Very nice. Very nice.
Uh-huh.
Good recollection. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, then, how long did you stay at the Y, Bob, before
3
you
years.
moved
3
on?
years.
Okay.
3 years, from 1957 to 1960. And I had an offer to go to the most magnificent church in America, built by John D. Rockefeller Jr. in Manhattan. And I think, I don't think I think that probably they were beginning to have interracial teenagers to come to its big program, like the one I had in Minot that was all white. And so they were looking for someone, my predecessor had retired. They were looking for someone who could, again, bridge the gap between culture, education, wealth, lack of opportunities. These were all young people, and this was their backgrounds. And so, in fact, when I said that my ministry was defined in North Dakota in the 50s, it made it possible for me to receive that job to help, again, build bridges and bring young people together. Right. Hispanic, Asian, white, black, and 300 kids or so, Sunday school for 3 hours on Sunday, youth program for about 3 or 4 hours on Friday night, and all in between. And we had all the facilities necessary to take care of them. Everything but a swimming pool.
Yes. Wow, what a wonderful calling. And you have been at the right place at the right time.
That's exactly the way I look at it. It was rather providential that I should have been on the list to be looked at as a potential minister to youth at Riverside Church. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I want to go back to North Dakota and thinking about the air base again when the Air Force brought in all those soldiers and the military people. Were they? How did you feel that you were brought there to the Y to help bridge the gap?
Yes.
How did that work? Tell me how you went about doing that.
Excellent question, because the air base had not been completed, nor did it open before I left.
Oh.
So my experience was the first men that were assigned to the air base, if they had families, they would move into town, find a house in town. If they didn't have families, they would live in the dormitory at dormitories at the YMCA. So my opportunity before leaving in 60 was to get to know some of the black military airmen who lived in the YMCA until their living quarters were finished at the air base, which wasn't until after I left. Okay. So things were going along well the first, couple of months, years rather. But as more blacks began to come in, single at this point, there more prejudice and discrimination was beginning to raise its ugly head when they came. And in larger numbers. That's always the case, You can take 1 or 2 blacks, which you can't take, it's always called a tipping point, and things begin to change. Whites begin to not want you to be there,
And that may have been precipitated by television and what was seen on television at that time in the 60s.
There was not much television in those days.
Well, in the 60s, or are you talking about the 50s?
50s.
Okay, all right. That would have been more in the 50s.
I left in 1960.
Okay.
But I was at the Y during the 57 to 60. And I don't think we even had a television in the Y. No. Kids weren't locked into televisions and cell phones and computers. That was all later.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yes.
Bob, how did you celebrate Christmas on the prairie when you were at Berthold?
Well, that's one of my saddest stories.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
You don't have to mention it if you don't want to.
Oh, no. That's in the book. It's in my book.
Okay.
The worst time I've ever had in my life was Christmas 1955. I'd made all the plans for the Christmas pageant and Christmas Eve, and people brought a lot of gifts to my house. What they couldn't pay me in salary, they would always pay me in wild game and baked goods and knitting and things like that I needed, because the salary was only $2,700 a year, if you can believe that. And I'll tell you the ending before I get to it. It's what we call assumptions. That's the word. All the parishioners, and there weren't that many, maybe 12, 15, 20 families. they all thought that I had been invited to somebody else's house,
Oh,
and no one invited me for Christmas Eve or Christmas Day.
oh, that would be
I
sad.
spent Christmas Day all by myself with my 3-month-old German Shepherd dog, and
Okay.
that was the worst. That was the worst Christmas I ever experienced.
I
But
can understand.
it taught me a lesson that I would never be alone at Christmas again. And when I knew that there were people that had no place to go, wherever I was, I would certainly open my house to bring them to my house so they would have
Mhm.
this opportunity.
Boy.
That was a terrible time for me.
A lesson learned.
A lesson learned, exactly. Yes. And I
Yes.
called the operator, who, she was a central operator. You had to
Uh-huh.
dial the phone on the wall,
Yeah.
get her, and then I had to call my mother and my family. They were having a wonderful time in Chicago, almost
Yeah.
forgot about me. And
Yeah.
I just gave it up at that point. I just
Hmm.
couldn't manage it. Yeah. Mhm. But
Okay.
everything, and they didn't discover it until about 2 weeks later. Where were you for Christmas? I mean, you weren't.
Oh,
Oh my goodness, we made a mistake. The
So
assumption.
I want to go back to your college. I looked online and it said that in 1946, Doane College was established, and you must have been one of the first students to enter that
No,
college.
it was at 1892 established.
Oh, well, it said something about 1946. Maybe what number would that have been?
I don't know. But it was there when I got there. I went there to a conference. Well, that's what it was. I went to a conference for the
Okay.
Congregational Young People, the National Youth Jamboree or Conference in 1946. That's when I first saw the college.
Oh, okay.
And then I went back,
I-
worked a year to see if I could go there. I was able to afford it. So I worked a year and I went, applied to the college. They didn't want to accept me because I was black. They said, no student here, black, no white student wanted to room with a black person. Young lady from my church went with me. No student applied for me, applied also. They told her. So they rejected us. So then I got on my high horses and started working the denominational leadership. And that dean of students got fired, and they brought a new dean on.
Oh, my.
Before we registered someplace else, they sent us letters of acceptance and told us who our roommates would be. And so I finished my last 2.5 years at Doane College, 1946 to 1952.
Okay. Man, that must have been tough emotionally at times.
It was tough, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
yeah.
But we met people.
You've mentioned some of the advantages of being in North Dakota at Berthold and Minot. It sets you up for the rest of your life. Are there any outstanding incidences that may have helped with that?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, the fact that I was appointed to Riverside Church, that was a giant step. Imagine coming from a church in Berthold, North Dakota, and your next parish would be a multi-thousand member church in the city of New York, built by one of the wealthiest families in New York, and being able to bring young people together and their families to help them to become full-fledged Christian members of this major Christian institution. That was the major thing. And then everything else began to fall into place in terms of opportunities, responsibilities, working with young people as I did in Minot and with their families, being asked to join certain boards and committees to expand my interest in social action and pastoring work. So it all sort of fit together.
It did. And as you look back on it, those doors opened. God was at work. You just didn't know it at the time, perhaps.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Bob, in getting ready to close our fun chat for today, can you recall just off the top of your head, what a fun memory of the 1950s was?
I hadn't thought of that. Fun memory. Well, I just think working with young people has been the greatest opportunities that I've had in my life, both in North Dakota, New York City, and then in New Orleans when I was Dean of Chapel and dean of students at Dillard University, historic Black college. Those were those jobs were three of the greatest jobs that I've ever had, because you could see the progress you made by working with teenagers and as they became adults. Second to that is I have a knack to stay in touch with people. So I'm still in touch with some of my young people from North Dakota, still in touch with some of my young people in those days from Riverside Church, and still in touch with students that were students at the university in New Orleans, which has really enriched my life because it's like an extended family. And I would put those three together to say that combination of those extremely opposite jobs, different part of the spectrum, were the fun times of my life before marriage and having my own family and so forth and so on.
Yes. And can you think of one trait, personality trait, characteristic of what would have influenced you from the 50s and it has influenced you your entire adult life?
I would say having sustainability and resilience to handle problems, not only my own personal problems, which I had many during that time when I was there by myself, but also helping young people to overcome some of the issues that have trapped them in their ability to grow and develop and to become men and women of faith. And so I think that was the issue, building upon my own faith, my own understanding of biblical and theological background that kept me on the straight and narrow.
Sure. Bob, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank both of you for inviting me. It's kind of an unusual thing for me to do, but it's just like going to North Dakota.
Jackson and I don't even live there, but we sure did in the 50s.
Yes.
What a wonderful, we thank you. You are a man of integrity, and that is so heartwarming to me to have met you.
Yes.
Wonderful program. And I'll certainly let people know that when I'm going to be aired, when you let me know.
Yes, we'll do. And folks, remember, Bob has a couple of books out. I believe you can get them on Amazon. Would that be true, Bob? Okay. And he particularly talks about his life in North Dakota, as the book title, Flying the Buttermilk. And then what was the other title?
The first memoir was called Crossing Barriers and Building Bridges.
Okay.
And like the story of my life. Flying the Buttermilk focuses on North Dakota.
Okay.
And the third book is one about my community in Chicago called Tight Little Island. Those are the three books that I've written since I've been here at the retirement community.
They all sound very interesting to read. Viewers, thank you for being our guest today on the 1950
Fun Chat. A pleasure, believe me. And congratulations on your 35th.
This is number 85.
85. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And don't forget to go ahead, Janine.
It's been really fun to do these fun chats just because of what we learn about history of the 50s. And, for me anyway, learning history is so much more fun and exciting when I can learn it from someone who actually lived it rather than just read facts and figures. So here we go, folks. This is number 85 of the Fun Chats.
Congratulations. Congratulations. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie, can you close our program today?
Why, certainly. I want to remind our viewers to check out www.whilethewindmillwatch.com. And I highlighted earlier all the things you can find there. And please look at the red button that you see there on your screen. Press that to subscribe, and the blue thumbs up button. We would appreciate having you do that. So tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s Fun Chat. So till next time, toodaloo.
A fun chat. Thank you.
Yes. Bye-bye.